This is the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, presented by thehoosier.com. Before we jump into this video, pause it right now and go subscribe to the Hoosier.com website, now a part of On3 Sports, for exclusive content covering the Indiana Hoosiers, including exclusive interviews, live recruiting updates, and much more. Make sure to join our community. We really appreciate it.
And Hoosier Nation, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button here on our YouTube page. We got plenty of more content on here, including more talking about the Hoosiers podcast episodes, recruiting highlights, press conferences, and much, much more. It literally takes 2 seconds. Just do it right now, get it over with, and then go on and let's enjoy this new episode.
Welcome into the Talkin Bout The Hoosier podcast. I'm Zach Browning. He's Kyler Staley. Welcome back. It's been a little bit of a hiatus for us here on the Talkin Bout The Hoosiers podcast, but we're back this week to talk about Indiana basketball. Kyler, it may be the middle of the summer. It might be nearing the start of August, but there's still plenty to talk about on the IU basketball front, specifically the recruiting front. And that recruiting stuff and everything to talk about is not limited to future classes. Indiana basketball landing a commit and making a roster addition that is expected to join them for the 2025 and 2026 season this upcoming year. Kyler, Andrej Acimovic from Bosnia, the latest addition, scholarship number 13, finally filled for Indiana. Everybody online can kind of lay their thoughts at rest there. Indiana's finally used that 13 scholarship. Acimovic, though, a 6'11 center from Bosnia. What are your initial thoughts on Acimovic?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. Obviously, no Anthony Leal, no Luke Goody. Obviously, they were kind of holding out some scholarships for them in case they got their waivers approved, but obviously they didn't. NCAA denied those. So you always knew that Indiana was going to eventually fill the 13 scholarships, right? Darian DeVries made that kind of apparent earlier this summer, late spring, I think. 13 is probably the magic number that he wants to stick with. And a lot of people, when they looked at the roster, how it was shaping out, transfer portal wise, the two freshmen that they brought in with Trent and Aleska Rristich, you kind of, the fan base were like, we need to go out and get a big, we got to fill out that front court. And that's what they did. Now I will be the first to say, and you probably agree with me, I don't think Andrej is going to play a big factor this season. I know a lot of people are like, you got to go out and get a 7-foot tall guy that can protect the rim or whatever. That's not the route they're going to go for. Obviously, Andrej is a big guy, 7-foot guy, but he's still got a big of a learning curve. I think, he does some really good things, has his back to the basket 90% of the time, really, really soft touch around the rim, can stretch the floor out well, 3-level scorer. So there's a lot of potential there, a lot of upside there. I just don't think it's going to be this year, may not even be next year. I think he's a guy that they're going to stash away. He's going to be a really, really good practice player for guys like Reed Bailey, Sam Alexis, Josh Harris, Trent Sisley, those guys to go up against. I think he's going to learn the college style, the college way of playing, and DeVries and his staff are going to develop him. And then hopefully by year 2, year 3, he's a guy, if you can keep him on your roster until then, he's a guy that should be ready to go. I do like the fact that Indiana's going the international route. I think the more successful teams that you see nowadays are people that have, at least a few 2 or 3 international guys on the roster because they come in for the most part, they're ready to play. And they have a really smart IQ, a good on-floor IQ as well. But overall, I really, really like the pickup, and it's good to see that Indiana finally now has a full roster.
You mentioned the fact that he's probably a little bit more of a developmental piece. I'll read off some numbers real quick. 6'11", 17.5 points per game, 7.5 rebounds per game. That's in the U19 ABA league, which is the top league in the ABA, but still just U19. 17 points, 8 rebounds, 39% from 3 in the senior level division in Bosnia. So those numbers, they look great on paper, and they are great. Those are good numbers for any kid of any age. But when you're looking at the competition he's playing against, this is not an Alexa Rristich type of situation. Rristich is playing, when he was in the Euro Championship, he was playing against other professionals, against other elite competition, against guys that are older and actively playing professional basketball. The competition that Andrej Acimovic is putting those numbers up against is not really the same level of competition. It's more the kind of high school, college level of basketball over there in Bosnia. So that's why I think expectations probably need to be tempered a little bit with Acimovic. I agree that he's probably going to be a little bit more of a developmental piece. Now, fans are clamoring. Some people are asking, well, he's 6'11". Indiana doesn't really have a ton of size. Now, I'm maybe in the minority here, Kyler, but I'm one of those that doesn't necessarily think the fact that Sam Alexis is only listed at 6'9". Reed Bailey is not a true interior presence in the center. Neither is Josh Harris down low defensively, at least. I don't think Indiana will have much problem defending the rim. I think the whole goal was to be athletic and be versatile and be switchable defensively. And I think that's what Indiana's done. But I do agree, I don't think Acimovic really factors into Indiana's plans for the 25-26 season. Going down the line, though, I think this benefits Indiana not just for the reasons on the court. You talked about building good recruiting pathways and path lines to the international routes. And I think that's what not only does Acimovic bring, but also Rristich as well. Think about Drew Adams. He has those international connections. He was over at the FIBA events earlier this summer in Switzerland, watching a handful of American targets and watching America run through that championship tournament. But you got to have some sort of connection internationally. I think, in whether or not he ever pans out on the court, I think Acimovic can kind of bring that connection and that relatability to some future international prospects as well. So maybe even not on the court. I think it's a good pull, obviously on the court too, but I think off the court, I think he has a good addition. I think it provides some positives for Indiana too.
Yeah, long term, this is a really good pickup. And you touched on the defensive aspect. A lot of the Indiana fans are a little worried right now because, when it comes to rim protecting, Indiana's had it pretty much set for the past 6-8 years or so, maybe even dating back to the Archie Miller era towards the end there when he obviously got Trace Jackson Davis and stuff, but they're used to the Kalel Wares, Umar Ballos, TJD, so this is going to be kind of interesting. And I think I mentioned it before, either on Indiana Sports Beat Radio or on this podcast as well, but, DeVries' style is not necessarily needing a true rim protector. I think he wants guys, we always talk about the positional versatility and stuff, but he wants guys that, there's different ways that you can be impactful on the defensive end. Besides protecting the rim. I mean, you can stop him in the perimeter game. And I think that's what he's got guys for. You think about Tatum Connerway, Tucker DeVries, obviously those guys, Josiah Miles, if those guys can buy in on the defensive end, you really don't have to worry about too much when it comes to the rim protecting. But obviously, size is a little bit of a question mark, but obviously they got a guy. Obviously, I like you and I agree on. We don't think that he's going to be a main factor. Now you'll see him in spot minutes. I could totally see him, earlier on in the season when they're playing those bye games. If you want to get him some minutes, just kind of see what he can do on the floor, I can totally see that. But when you start getting into Big Ten play, barring any injuries, I just don't think that you see him a whole lot. Same with Rristich as well. I think Rristich maybe has a little bit more of a pathway to play a little bit, but right now I just don't see those guys. I think they're going to stash them for a little bit, develop them, and then you talk about that pipeline. If they can show that, hey, I developed these guys or whatever, Drew Adams can continue to have a really, really good network internationally. Same with the other coaching staff, as the whole rest of the coaching staff as well. Then you're going to start getting those international guys. And like I said earlier, I think the more successful programs that you see nowadays have a good chunk of international guys because those guys come in and they just have a different mindset. They don't play AAU basketball. AAU basketball is a lot of, do me type of ball, a lot of individual stuff. But these guys come in, they know kind of how to play as a team. They just have a different kind of level of how they teach basketball over there. And when they have a little bit of more development when it comes to the college game and can play a little bit quicker, those guys are normally really, really good. So long-term, really, really like the pickup. I think it's going to be really good if you can keep him. Obviously there's the transfer portal and you have to kind of watch out for that, but they can keep him, kind of build around him, continue to get bigs to kind of go into that front court in the next few years. I think you're going to have a really, really solid front court, year 2 or year 3 with Darian DeVries.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I think if you were to compare the two international guys, Rristich and Acimovic, I'd say that Rristich is more likely to play this upcoming year. I don't think either are too likely to play that big of a role, but also if there was a 6'11", 7-foot rim protector that could step right into the college game and contribute right away at the Big Ten level, I think he probably would have been swallowed up a lot quicker than July 28th. So I'm not sure Indiana fans should expect too much out of the international guys this upcoming season, but pushing our focus now a little bit further down the road, let's look at the class of 2026, the class coming along well so far for Indiana, Kyler. One commit so far in this class. It's Prince Alexander Moody. I believe he goes by Alex Moody, is what I've gathered from talking to some of the guys that know him, some of the other DMV guys and other DMV recruits. He goes by Alex Moody. Ranked number 122, not jumping off the page as far as athleticism or three-point shooting. He doesn't necessarily do anything, Kyler, to me at least, at an elite level. But in that same vein, there's not necessarily anything that he doesn't do well or can't do well. And I think he'll find a way to contribute, maybe not immediately when he steps onto campus, but I think he's a solid 3-4 year type of guy. And I think eventually he'll be able to contribute for Indiana. And I think at some point down the line, Indiana fans will grow to love this guy. They have already, with the fact that he's so active on social media. But I think Prince Alexander Moody, Kyler, is a guy that every recruiting class needs. You need a guy that's not exactly the 5-star, top 20 type of guy, but the guy that's going to be here 3 or 4 years and give you everything he's got and fight for the name really on the front of the jersey.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what Alexander Moody's going to do. I mean, you see his tweets and everything. Anytime someone mentions IU on Twitter or whatnot, he's the first one to reply and say, "Go Hoosiers," or something like that. So the fact that he is, a guy that's not from the state of Indiana, has already bought in. I think that's awesome to see. He's already bought into the culture, and he's trying to get other guys in that 2026 class to, look at Indiana and come with him and stuff. But, when Indiana offered him, it was in the spring, if I can remember correctly, when they offered him in the spring. And I remember that first EYBL weekend I remember watching him and I was like, you know what, he might be my number one choice, just because of what he can do on the floor. Like you mentioned, he's not like an elite guy in one area. He's just an overall really, really balanced guy. I think if you had to describe him, he'd probably be a 3-and-D type of guy, a guy that you can just plug and play, in the perimeter, in the backcourt, on the wing, wherever. And he's a guy that is capable of going off for 20-plus points, or he's a guy that's going to give you 10 assists a game. He's going to give you multiple rebounds a game. He's going to defend. And I think that's what you need in a type of guy. Positional versatility, a guy that can do a whole lot on the floor, not necessarily an elite guy, but a guy that can do a whole lot on the floor, who's got a smooth jumper, that's got, pretty much everything you want, length on the wing as well. I think he's a perfect guy to start off your 2026 class. He's not going to be a McDonald's All-American probably, but he's going to be a nice solid piece that you hope to have in 2-3 years. And you can just kind of develop, and, hopefully by his junior year or so, he's going to be one of the top stars on this team. But I really, really like the way that Indiana's starting off the 2026 class. I think they position them well on, multiple different recruits as well. But you get a guy like Prince Alexander Moody to kind of start off your class, I think you're really, really set as far as what you can kind of build around him.
Elsewhere in that 2026 class, Indiana still is being very active, obviously. This is looking like probably a 3 or 4 player class for Indiana, just given the kind of roster overhaul that Darian DeVries had to do this offseason. But elsewhere in the 26 class, Indiana's already starting to establish a couple more official visits coming up here in the next couple of weeks. And this is kind of list cut season. It's late July, nearing early August. This is kind of list cut season. But out of the guys that have now scheduled Indiana visits in the coming weeks, you think of guys like Lachel Alman, Tay Kenny is one of those guys. Anthony Thompson just recently cut his list. He doesn't have a visit scheduled yet, but you'd imagine Indiana would get a visit at some point. Jordan Smith Jr. in that kind of same boat with Thompson. He just cut his list of suitors down to, I think, 12 for Jordan Smith Jr., but a visit likely coming for Indiana. Out of those guys that have already or are going to likely schedule visits to Indiana, is there anybody that's standing out to you, whether it's their play on the court or whether it's you think that Indiana and that player might have a little bit stronger of a connection than some other teams?
I think probably the first guy you got to kind of start off when you're looking at the list. And I first, before we even get into this, go to thehoosier.com and check out the hot board that Alec put together. It's up to date. It's going to be up to date as the offers come in, as updates come in. But number one on that hot board is Lachel Alman, a guy that already took a visit to Indiana earlier in the summer. A guy that you feel like Indiana, I wouldn't say they're in the driver's seat, but they have a pretty good spot in his recruitment. I would say you got to look out for schools like Tennessee, I think Kansas as well, if I can remember correctly. Oklahoma State, NC State, those types of teams. You got to kind of look out for them. But, there's really good connections there with Indiana. I think Kenny Johnson's kind of the lead recruiter, if I can remember correctly on that. But he's a guy that you watch him play. He can do a lot on the floor. He's got really, really good size, listed as a power forward, but can play on the wing. He showed that, pretty well on the AAU circuit this year. He's a guy that, can take a defender off the dribble. If they're a bigger defender on the wing, he can back down a smaller defender, just a guy that can provide a lot on the floor. Super athletic, super powerful. But I think when you look at the top guys, he's probably the number one guy right now that you look at. That can obviously change in the next few weeks, but I would say just starting off the list, I think he's probably the number one guy that's still remaining for Indiana.
And I want to talk about and touch on the guards a little bit. It's clear, yes, Darian DeVries got the commitment from Prince Alexander Moody. He is a guard, but it's clear that DeVries has his sights set high as far as guards and who he wants, not only in the 26 class, but in the 27 class as well. We'll touch on that a little bit later. But you think about the guys that already have visits scheduled, whether it's Tay Kinney, which is an August visit, Darren Rippey is an October visit, Jordan Smith Jr., those three guards, those are all three incredibly highly rated guards and highly touted guards in the 26 class. And Darian DeVries, this is year one at Indiana, his first true kind of real recruiting cycle will be the 26th cycle. But he's setting his sights really high on these guards. He's not going after these lower ranked type of guards. He's setting his sights at these 4 stars, these 5 stars, these guards specifically that are ranked inside the top 20, top 25 in the class. And I think that really shows you how important that guards are to Darian DeVries. He knows the importance of having strong guard play, not only throughout the regular season, but also as you get into the Big Ten tournament and into March and the NCAA tournament as well. But what are your thoughts on those three right there? I just mentioned Rippey. You've got Jordan Smith Jr. as well. You've got Tay Kinney. For me personally, I think that you're really splitting hairs when you're comparing them. I think all three kind of bring different things to the game. If you look at Kenny, he might be a little bit more of an out-and-out scorer. I think he's got some playmaking in there too. Jordan Smith Jr., maybe not as elite of a scorer, maybe kind of got some shades of his team takeover teammate in Prince Alexander Moody as far as he's not necessarily super-duper elite at one thing, but he's really good at a little bit of everything. And then you've got Darren Rippey too, who, when I watch him, he looks like John Morant Jr. So kind of what are your thoughts on those three guards there, Kyler?
Yeah, I mean, like you just mentioned, they've obviously positioned themselves well for these guys. Getting visits is probably the number one thing. Obviously, the number one thing is getting commitments, but getting visits as close as you can get. Getting these top dogs like on campus is just huge when you got them for official visits, and they've got 3 of the best that are going to be on campus. So I really, really like them. They each, how should I word this? They each provide something different, kind of like you mentioned. Jordan Smith Jr. is a guy that we watched a ton, him playing with Prince Alexander Moody, a guy that's just arguably can make a case as the number one player in the 2026 class. I think he's ranked number 4 right now on the On3 rankings, but just a guy that's just do it all type of thing. And a guy that plays with explosive ability. Darren Rippey Jr., John Morant, I think is a perfect comparison with him. Super, super athletic guard. There's tons of times you saw him on the, was it the EYBL circuit? Yeah. You would see him there. You would see these highlights on Twitter where it's just like, he's got the dunk of the weekend. But for them to put themselves in these conversations as a first-year Indiana head coach, I do like the fact that DeVries is not, shying away from the top recruits, but he's also picking out the top recruits that make sense for his certain style. I feel like in previous years, and we'll just kind of talk about like the Mike Woodson era, I feel like Mike Woodson was obviously extending a lot of offers to the top guys or whatever, the McDonald's All-Americans, but they were just offers. Some of them didn't really make sense for the system. Whereas I feel like, the offers that are being extended from Darian DeVries make sense, and they fit his system and how he wants to play. So I don't know if Indiana will land any of them, but I think they're in a good position to land at least one of them. It's just all about where the dominoes fall, who's the first to commit elsewhere, and then kind of seeing where that goes there. But I really like where they're at with these guys. Getting them on campus is big. Then at that point, it's just all about sealing the deal with these types of guys.
Kind of last position I want to touch on in the 26 class, Kyler, is the center spot. There's kind of 3, maybe 4 main guys that are kind of separating themselves as potential candidates for Indiana to get pledges from in the 2026 class at the center spot. You look at some of the top guys, you're thinking Ethan Taylor, you're thinking Irfan Diane, you're thinking Luigi. Sorry for those technical difficulties. I think I just had a little bit of a tech malfunction there, but we're back. As I was saying, a couple of the top centers available for Indiana in the 26th class that they're kind of targeting. You look at Arifan Diane, you look at Swigo, you look at Ethan Taylor. He's another option. Marcus Ponder as well in that center spot. I think we share the same belief on this, Kyler. I think with who we think Indiana's number one option should be, kind of the guy that we fell in love with the most on this kind of AAU summer and the high school summer as well. I think we're both big Arifan Diane kind of fans from a skill set perspective. Ethan Taylor, I know I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think we're super excited about as far as what he's shown. He is kind of used in a different way on MoKan Elite as far as the AAU kind of circuit is concerned. But what do you think about where Indiana stands with those centers? And is it Diane that's kind of standing out above the rest for you?
Yeah, and I think it's pretty similar to the guards. I think Indiana's positioned themselves well to land maybe at least one of these, bigs out there. But yeah, agree, Diane. I think he is my number one center option for Indiana. Just a powerful, huge force on the block and not going to stretch the floor out or anything. Pretty similar. I've been comparing him to Omar Ballo, the way that Indiana used Omar last year. He's actually a really, really good passer out of the block, but just a guy that's just going to overpower you on the low block, go against the smaller, post defenders and stuff. Really, really like his motor. Really like what he brings to the floor. But Ethan Taylor, just a different type of center. There's just been a lot of games where it's just inconsistency with me. And I think that's kind of the main kind of, separation between those guys. Not to knock on Ethan Taylor. He's ranked very, very highly, arguably the best postman in the 2026 class, but he's just a kind of a different guy. But at the same time, you also talk about Marquise Ponder as well, a guy that had Indiana in his final cut list as well. So these guys, they're positioning themselves well for some of the bigs. It's just all about landing at least one of them. Same with the three guards that we talked about. You just need to land at least one of them. And then if you can land one of the bigs, one of the guards, you're looking at a really, really high level class. You throw in with Prince Alexander Moody, maybe they go out and add somebody else. But if you can just get those three kind of positions filled, that's a really, really good freshman class. And then you got guys coming back next year, and then you just fill in the gaps with the transfer portal. So I do like how Indiana and Darian DeVries' first year with Indiana has positioned himself well. I give a lot of credit to the Indiana coaching staff as well for them to get in those positions, the relationships that they have with these recruits all around the country. So really, really good stuff by Indiana and Darian DeVries right now when it comes to the top bigs in the country.
I guess just to kind of finalize what we're talking about with the 26th class, Kyler, if you had to kind of give your best case scenario for Indiana, you maybe just did it a little bit there, but whether it's landing one of the guards, landing the centers, for me, I think I'd personally go, you land one of the centers, you land one of those guards we talked about, you add them to Prince Alexander Moody, and then you go out and finish the class with whether it's Lachel Alman or Anthony Thompson. I think one of those two guys would be a perfect addition to the class as well. In a perfect world for Darian DeVries, what do you think the best case scenario looks like for this 26th class?
Perfect world, you land Lachel Alman. I think that would be the first start. And then I think we just kind of agree on it. You land one of the three guards that we talked about, and then you land one of the three centers that we talked about. So, and I think that's a perfect world. And then maybe if you want to get really crazy or whatever, you maybe go out and add an international guy to kind of add with that, freshman class. But that's 5 freshmen. You don't really see that a whole lot nowadays, I don't think. It's more of a 3 freshman class, and then you fill in with transfer portal guys. But, that's still going to be hard. That's kind of wishful thinking and stuff. Things can change. There could be a scenario where Indiana doesn't land a single big or a single guard. Or there's a scenario, I think worst case scenario is you just have Prince Alexander Moody coming in next year, and that's just a one-man class or whatever. But I totally agree. Like, I think that Indiana is going to position themselves well to land some guys. I think Darian DeVries has made it kind of apparent that he wants guys that are 2 or 3 year guys that he can develop, that can be in the system for a little bit and just kind of fill in the holes where he needs to with the transfer portal. But I think that's probably my best case scenario right there.
All right, Kyler, before we wrap things up, let's quickly touch on the class of 27 and the class of 28, and specifically how talented the Midwest seems to be
in those classes. When you look at the 27 class, you've got obviously the Fishers duo of Jason Gardner Jr. and Cooper Zachary. Also in-state Isaiah Hill is another big he's at Pike playing with Indy Heat. They just won Peach Jam not too long ago, earlier this month. So the 27 class, very talented, specifically in the Midwest, specifically in the state of Indiana. But then even if you extend that further, Kyler, to the class of 28, we've talked a lot about Boogie Cook throughout the summer. He's not in the state, but around the state in the Midwest. We think about Noah Washington, Caleb Kuhlman. We've kind of had our own separate debates on who we think might be and might end up being the number one ranked player out of the state of Indiana in the class of 2028, whether it is Kuhlman, whether it is Washington. But just what are your thoughts on the future talent in the Midwest in those classes of 27 and 28?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the state of Indiana, I think, has got some really, really good players in the 2027 class, 2028 class. I know Boogie Cook is a Kentucky guy, but runs with Indiana Elite as well. But, you mentioned Jason Gardner Jr. To me, he's and that could just be my bias, my in-state bias, but I feel like he's number one when it comes to guys that you want to see Indiana land in the 2027 class, a guy that could is just relentless, in the lane, and a guy that could just really make plays. Cooper Zachary, I know there's going to be a little bit size issues there. I don't know if Indiana will ever extend an offer to him, but he's also a guy that's one of the top guys in the state guard-wise. And then Isaiah Hill, we all know how great of an elite shot blocker he is and what he can do if his offensive game is clicking. He's totally unstoppable if his offensive game is clicking. But I think overall, and it's not just really the Midwest guys, you look at overall the guys that they've extended offers to, the 2027 class, 2028 class. I do like the fact that DeVries and the staff are going to build early relationships with these guys, and they're going to kind of, extend offers to them as early as they can. And then just kind of hope to grow that relationship and build that relationship, for the next few years and stuff. But right now there's probably 15 offers offered in the 27 class. I think there's only technically 2 offers in the 2028 class, if I can remember correctly. But yeah, I mean, I think DeVries and the staff has done a really, really good job of, kind of picking out the top talent, in the Midwest in the 2027 class. And there's obviously going to be a lot more offers extended between now and when these guys graduate high school. But the way that they position themselves well in the later classes, I think is really, really a really strong sign that DeVries and his staff want to build relationships and want to continue to, kind of grow in that area.
I know we talked about Isaiah Hill. I think the consensus between us is that he might be the best U16 shot blocker that we saw this past summer. Cooper Zachary, too. I know everybody has their opinions on Cooper Zachary specifically. He's kind of like a tantalizing prospect. Is he too big? Is he too small? Is he big enough? Can he play at the high major level? And so far, he hasn't really gotten any high major offers. So we'll see if in the near future, maybe further down the line, if Cooper Zachary can earn that offer from Indiana. Obviously, his high school teammate Jason Gardner Jr. figures to be one of the top prospects in the entire country entering the 2027 class, entering next season. But again, just to kind of wrap things up here, there's a lot of guys that have set visit dates for the 26 class, even the 27 class further down the line. If you look at the 27 class, I know Davion Thompson's scheduled to visit Indiana here in the coming days. I believe July 30th is what his dad told me that his visit was set for. But in the 2026 class, obviously, Lachel Alman's already visited. Darren Rippey, I believe, again, that's a mid-October visit for Rippey. I think it's coming weekend. So the weekend that Indiana plays Michigan State is when Rippey will be in Bloomington. You look at Tay Kenny, that's a late August, early October visit for him. There's a lot of guys. Swigo obviously has already visited. Anthony Thomas, maybe expect a visit to come out of there at some point in the near future. But if I'm not missing anything, Kyler, I think that's pretty much all we've got so far on this episode of Talking About the Hoosiers. So that's going to go ahead and wrap things up here for us. Again, another episode of Talking About the Hoosiers here, chatting some Indiana basketball recruiting. It's the dead middle of the summer, maybe a little bit of a quiet period on the recruiting front with the live periods and the summer recruiting schedule wrapping up earlier this month of July. But still plenty going on, and we've got you covered over at thehoosier.com to make sure you're updated not only with Indiana basketball, but Indiana football. About a month away from opening their season. Big Ten Media Days were last week. We've got plenty of content on the football and basketball side, both the team-related side and the recruiting side of things as well. So head over to thehoosier.com if you haven't already and subscribe. It's $1 for the first week, 50% off for the rest of the year. You're really not going to find a better deal for the amount of content we're pumping out and the quality of content we're pumping out over there. But for one final time, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Talking About the Hoosiers. For Kyler Staley, I'm Zach Browning, saying so long.